But that's today. But we don't even know what the jobs of the future are going to look like. We know that people will work from wherever they want. It's quite fashionable to say that the education system is broken. It's not broken. It's wonderfully constructed.
Good morning. I'm sorry I can't speak Spanish. I'm also sorry I can't sing. But when I was listening to this lovely music, you must have noticed that when you listen to good music, you get pictures in your mind. Images. It's very important to get those images in your mind because that brings the music to life. So also in science. Science can be very dry, very boring, full of numbers and data, that sort of thing. But eventually, it has to give you a picture. And when it does that, then you get a glimpse of nature. So now that you've heard the music, I will take you through some work in the hope that you will be able to appreciate, I hope at the end of it, a small picture from nature about learning. So it's about my work for many years now, almost 20. And it kind of points towards the future. At least I see it that way. What kind of future is that? Well, very different from what it used to be, and perhaps very different from what the present is as well. Let me put it this way. We go to school and we spend about the first 17 years of our life in school. Starting age 5, we go, for 12 years into school. For what purpose? So that when we come out of school, we are equipped to deal with life. In what way? So let's take an example. Suppose you were to be blindfolded and taken off in a plane somewhere and put in a place. Could be a city, could be I don't know, could be anywhere. And all you're given is a map, and you're asked, the blindfold is taken off, and you're asked, where are you? Now, presumably, you can figure it out. How would you do that? Well, you look at your map, you'll look up, you'll try to correlate what you're seeing in real life with things on the map, and then you'll say, okay, if the mountain's over there and the river is over here, then maybe I'm here somewhere. Then I make it more difficult. And I do the experiment again, and I blindfold you, and I put you somewhere, except that it's the middle of the night. So all you can see are the stars. And I don't give you a map, but I give you a sextant, to measure the angle of the stars with. And I give you some paper. Now, all of us have been through 12 years of schooling, which has taught us enough about topography and about trigonometry and about astronomy to be able to figure out where I am, using the sextant, the stars, and my piece of paper and pen. Do you agree? Do you all remember how to do that? Oh, no. Oh, my goodness. 12 years. So, why don't you remember? Would your fathers have remembered? Maybe not. Would your grandfathers have remembered? The ones who were on a ship going from one unknown point to another? Yes, they would have remembered every word of trigonometry, because they would be dead otherwise. Okay? So, why don't we remember now? Because given that situation, all that you would say is, by the way, excuse me, where is my smartphone? Okay, and that's all you need, really. So your brain decides that it doesn't need the trigonometry anymore, doesn't need to know how to use the sextant anymore. It forgets. Now, is that true or not? I don't know. I'm just putting it into your mind. You consider it. Well, carrying on with our experiment further, we could also say, but you need to know how to use the smartphone. If you're given the smartphone in an unknown place, you need to know how to use maps. And so should that be taught? I don't know. But I'll show you an experiment from a long time ago. Hang on. Okay, let me go back. Can you go back? Yeah, and back. And back. Yes, that's right. So this experiment was from 1999. And the experiment was actually very simple and somewhat similar to that little thing experiment that I was talking about. It was in this way. What would happen if you took a group of children who had never seen a computer before, had never heard of the internet, and simply give it to them? Add to that one more problem. The computer is in a language that they don't know. I did this experiment in 1999 in New Delhi, in India. At that time, there were children who had not seen a computer. You know, today they don't exist anywhere. But at that time, there were children who had not seen a computer, never heard of the internet, and they didn't know any English, very, very little. The computer was in English. How do you do an experiment like that? Well, in those days, what I did was to take a wall of a slum. In New Delhi, you have these very modern places, offices and shopping malls and this and that. And then you have slums. I think you call them favelas. And often enough, between the slum and the rest of the city, there is a wall which separates them. So I took a wall like that, and I made an opening in the wall, put a glass pane in front, put the computer from my side of the wall, which was the posh side of the wall, put the computer from that side, and I bricked it up. And I put a touchpad. So now, from the slum, at about 3 feet off the ground, you can see this blue square, Windows, and whatever was the browser at that time. The computer was connected to the internet. My question was, what would happen? Well, obviously, first thing that happens if you put anything that's 3 feet above the ground is that people who are 3 feet tall come there. So you had a whole lot of children who came there, and they stood around doing nothing. So I was quite embarrassed. So, but they're doing nothing. They're just scratching their head. Okay, what is it? I kept standing there, and I thought, well, this experiment is not going well because, they're not doing anything. Until I realized something, very important. That was a big lesson in education for me. If you have children, and if you have a grown-up person wearing a tie, standing and staring at them, they don't do anything. Okay? Okay, good. You remember that, right? The safest thing to do, if you have a person staring down at you, is to just stay still. So I thought, oh, maybe they're not doing anything because I'm there. So I turned around and I walked off. And as soon as I walked off, I heard the voices of children. And then a few hours later, a colleague of mine said, "What did you do over there? How did you do it so fast?" So I said, "What?" So he said, those children, they're browsing and they're teaching each other how to browse. So I said, that's not supposed to happen. In what language? And they said, well, it looks like English. So I said, well, that's impossible. And I tried to check. Okay. That's me. Version 1.0. So here's a picture from those times. So this boy on the right, he's 8 years old. His student is 6, and he was teaching her to browse in English on a computer that he had never seen before. Then I repeated it. So wherever I did the experiment, I got the same results. First, they would learn to browse. Then they learn to open up the computer and, do things with it, like paint. And then they learn how to download games, install them, and run them, as you just saw. And people in those days would keep asking me, but how does it happen? What's the mechanism? Who is teaching them? And it was obvious that no one is teaching them. They're doing it by themselves. But it seemed too complex for them to be doing this by themselves. So what was the mechanism? People kept asking. And I did not really have any answer. I didn't know what the mechanism was. Over the years, I started asking these children questions. First, a very simple question. So you have a hole-in-the-wall computer, you have a group of children, they're playing games. So I would go up and I'd say, okay, can the computer tell me what time it is? And they would say, yeah, that's very simple. And they'd say, this is the time, it's 11:30. And then I would say, oh, and what is the time in New York? And they would say, 11:30. So I would say, well, you know, somebody told me that the time over there is different. And they said, no, how can the time be different? Yeah. I said, somebody told me. So can you check? So I go back to the computer and, yes, it is different. It's, whatever, 12:30. So I'd say, come on, I don't believe this. You mean to say that there are two different times? It's 11:30 here, it's 12:30 there? And they said, well, that's what the computer says. So, so I said, well, why is the time different? And how is it different? This time, I would step aside a little, and there would be a buzzing noise as they talk. They do all sorts of things, and it takes a little longer this time. About 10 minutes later, they would say, the time is different. I'd say, why? Well, the earth is round, you see, and the sun shines from one side. So it's day on this side. There's night on the other side. And day and night have two different times, don't they? And I thought, oh my God, now what is this? This is a lesson. Where did a lesson come from? And I didn't know. I started making the questions harder and harder. So, you know, you would go in this sequence. What's the time here? What's the time in New York? Why is the time different? Oh, the earth is round. Why is the earth round? Why is it not, you know, a rectangle, a cube, a cone? Now it gets more difficult. Gravity. Oh my God, what's gravity? Who found it out? Oh, somebody called Newton. Oh, where did he live? Why did he find out gravity? Oh, the apple fell on his head. Okay, whatever. So I thought, this is really cool. I can keep driving this with one question after the other. And why are they doing these questions? Because they like the expression on my face when I hear the answer. Okay? They love to hear, oh my God, you did that? Okay. I thought there's something in this. But still, the big question to me from the rest of the world was, how does it work? And I didn't know. I came to this conclusion after 5 years of asking questions to children all around the world, practically. So, you know, it's a difficult statement to write as a teacher. But I could not find any question to which a child would not give me an answer. Not a child, remember, a group of children with the internet. I just couldn't find it. So I had to write this to say that groups of children, given the internet, can learn anything by themselves. And people didn't like it at all. They said, what do you mean anything? I said, well, you know, I mean, how can I prove it? I can only go on asking them more and more difficult questions until I come to a question one day where the children would say, we couldn't find the answer. Well, I haven't encountered a question like that yet. So I have to say that as far as I can tell, groups of children, given the internet, can learn anything by themselves. So I brought this method over to England in 2006 and tested the same thing in England. How do you do it? It's very simple. You know, anybody here, anybody who's a teacher here can do it. It's really very simple. You can do it inside a school. You don't really need the hole in the wall in that structure, except if the circumstances were like India in 1999. So how do you do it inside a classroom? Well, suppose you have 25 children. Take a ratio of 1:4. So you get about 6. Give them 6 internet connections. So put 6 computers with big screens inside the classroom. Just scatter them. Don't put them against the wall. Just here and there. Now bring in your 25 children and ask them a big, difficult question. So some teachers in those days in England would say, wait, now I will tell the children to make groups. And I would say, no, please, don't tell the children anything. Why don't you sit down? Because if there are 25 children and 6 internet connections, what else can they do except make groups? Okay. So don't tell them anything. When they make groups by themselves without being told, they make groups the way they want to make groups and not the way you want them to make groups. And that's a big difference. So then they make their groups. Then you hear this big buzzing sound of conversation. It reminds me of the hole in the wall. It reminds me of insects. There is a lot of movement. Children running from one computer to another. Look what they found. That's the reason why I said you should have big screens. The screens should be such that if you enter the classroom, you can see all the screens at the same time. And if you are working in one group around one computer, you should be able to see what's on all the other computers. Very important. Talking to each other is allowed. Walking around is allowed. Because you're not going to give them a test, right? You only ask them a question and you said, I want an answer from all of you, not from you and you and you separately. As soon as you do that, the whole logic of the classroom changes. It becomes one unified attempt at solving a problem. I still couldn't figure out how they do it and what exactly is the mechanism. But watch it.
Vicky answers on the app. Are you joking?
Or a molecule, which the total number of electrons is not equal to the total number of protons, giving it a net positive or negative electrical charge. The net charge on an ion is equal to the number of protons in the ion minus the number of electrons.
So that last bit was from an experiment done in Australia, and you know, as you saw, these were 10-year-old children, and they were talking about something quite complicated with electrons and protons and things like that. But the thing is that they would answer the questions. Teachers started to talk about this in England, saying, you know, this is very interesting, this is very nice, because instead of preparing for a lesson, you just convert your lesson into the right question. You know, obviously the question has to be right, then it will head towards whatever it is that you are going to teach. To give you some examples. A teacher, well, I'll tell you the most difficult one that I've done. A teacher in England said, Sugata, I am going to test you by giving you a topic that I am going to teach, which I think is the most boring topic in school. So I said, what's that? And she said, gum health. You know, gums? Gum health. So I thought, my God, gum health. Now, what do I do? And these were 7-year-olds. So I took their classroom, 5 computers, big screens. Then the children are sitting there. You know, you don't just give them the question like that. You build up to the question. So I asked them first, are babies born with teeth? So they said, no, babies, no teeth. So then I said, then what happens? Oh, they grow teeth. And then what happens? Now remember, they're 7 years old. So, oh, it falls out. So I said, oh my God, how stupid is that? They grow teeth and then the teeth fall out. And then what happens? Oh, it grows back again. I said, that's even more strange. It grows back again. And then what happens? Oh, nothing. No, I said, come on, then what happens? Oh, they think, oh, after many years, they fall off again. And I said, now this is getting very strange. You're born with no teeth, you grow teeth, the teeth fall off, they grow back again, and then they fall off again. And then what happens? And then, after thinking for a few seconds, they said, and they never grow back again. So I said, that is the strangest story I've heard. What is the reason for that? And instead of guessing, you've got 5 internet connections. Why don't you try? Tell me, I'll give you 20 minutes. 20, 25 minutes is the right time. So they're buzzing around the computers. And then they come back. And guess what they come back with? Gum health. Okay? The ability of the gums to hold the teeth, etc., etc., etc. So then I turned to my teacher friend and I said, well, that was the big question for this one. So, the point I'm trying to make is that converting a lesson into a question is not easy. You have to think. And you have to get it to a point where people would be really curious to know the answer. And in the process of finding the answer, would come across all those things that you were going to teach. That seemed to be the way. Schools started to build facilities to do this kind of thing. We called it a self-organized learning environment, or a SOLE, S-O-L-E. I think in Spanish you pronounce it SOLE. So a self-organized learning environment. Here are some examples of, as you can see, they don't look like classrooms. They kind of suggest that you should work in groups. In a space like that, you can't actually give a lecture. By this time, I was beginning to get an idea. I have to tell you something about my background. I don't have any formal instruction in the subject of education. I didn't learn that as a subject. What I learned as a subject in university was physics. And I drifted away from physics into computer science, into teaching other people computers, and finally landed myself into education because of the hole in the wall. So, the answer to what was happening in the hole in the wall seemed to have come from my old subject. Insects often make collectives. For example, bees make hives. Is that the word, panal? Is that a hive? So bees make a hive. If you take an individual bee and ask the bee, how did you make a hive with hexagons? Well, the bee is going to say, I don't know. In fact, I don't know what an hexagon is either. So the single bee doesn't know anything. but 100,000 of them together can build a perfect hive. If you have seen pictures of ant hills, in Africa, you get these ant nests, big, tall structures. They look like cathedrals, can be as tall as higher than a man. My question is, does an individual ant know how to do it? Of course not. But all of them together do. So does it mean that hundreds of thousands of ants together know enough civil engineering to build a cathedral? Does that make sense? But it happens. Nature shows us that that's how it happens. So is that something that we are seeing inside the hole in the wall or in the self-organized learning environment? A collective hive-like behavior clustered around the internet. These slides were originally in English and they've been translated, so I'm trying to figure out what it says. But I think I know. In physics and in mathematics, for about the last 50 years, people have known about something called a self-organized system. A system that organizes itself. And we know that when you do that, then something rather strange comes out of such a system. It's called spontaneous order. Okay? We don't know how it happens. There is nobody designing it. It just happens. But it's order. I have a little experiment which I do with children about this. And if you don't mind, if you will excuse me, may I do it with you? It only takes a few seconds. Is it all right? Okay, what I want you to do is to clap synchronously all together. Okay, go ahead. Thanks. Thank you. Okay? If you record that and play it back in slow motion, you will hear the first few seconds of chaos. All the claps are separate. And then you will hear them come together. My question to you is, who decided the frequency of the claps? And I could point to any of you and say, did you decide? And you would say, no, I didn't decide. If I then said, who decided the volume of the claps? And I point to somebody, did you decide? No, I didn't decide that. I didn't decide anything. Then how did the claps? If no human being decided the frequency of the claps, no human being here decided the volume of the claps, then how did the claps come together? Shall we conclude that there's something in this room that is not human? Okay. Yeah. Don't laugh nervously. Well, you know what? There is something in this room that is not human, but it's not an alien. It's a principle. It's called a self-organizing system. And we understand very little of it. Physicists don't understand in mathematics. We don't have the mathematics to describe it. But we know that under certain circumstances, chaos produces spontaneous order. Now, could that be a learning mechanism? That if given the appropriate impetus in the form of a question, children grouped around the internet, free to converse, will produce learning as spontaneous order. If it is true, we are in good luck because it happens by itself. It's for free. So a soul is basically an attempt to create a chaotic situation with children. And let me tell you this, for those of you who teach children, creating a chaotic situation with children is very easy. Okay. Give them a few internet connections, ask them a question. It helps if you tell them that, I don't know the answer to this question. They love it, particularly 9, 10, 11-year-old children. I'm going to meet some on Friday. They just love it when you say, I don't know the answer, but I'm very curious about it. And then leave them in that chaos, stand back, keep your fingers crossed, and wait for the claps to come together. And it will. It always does. So the word of soul started spreading out of England back in 2009. Teachers started talking with each other. Teachers, okay, it's very easy to try, let me try it. And one teacher would say, I tried it for geography, it was fantastic. Another teacher would say, I tried it for mathematics. Oh, it worked very well. It started spreading. I started getting invited to lectures, first inside England, then in the rest of Europe, then from all the other continents. It spread in a peculiar direction. It went out of England into southern Australia because of a big conference I went to in Melbourne in 2010. And then it spread, of all places, into the lower part of Latin America, into Argentina. Okay? And I went from school to school conducting souls in Spanish. You know why? Because you don't need to know Spanish in order to do a soul. Okay? So I did a hilarious one. I don't remember if it was either Argentina or the last time I was here in Chile, slightly up north from here. This whole group of children, and I had an interpreter. So just for the heck of it, I said to the interpreter, you stand outside. So she said, how are you going to talk to them? I said, I don't know. So I went inside. They were all 10 and 11-year-olds. It was a poor area. And I said, no Spanish. Any English? They said, no English. So I said, bring teacher back. They said, no. We did the soul. It took 1 hour with Google Translate. It worked just fine. So soul spread out. You know, a student of ours in Newcastle University wrote a program which would look through Twitter and look for the words soul, teacher, learning. And then he plotted it on a map. And that's what we got. So it had actually gone off viral.
Yes, he's my cousin.
Some examples.
Yes, he's my cousin.
His name was Paul Cézanne. Cézanne was his second name and Paul was his first name. He was French. He was born in 1839 and he died in 1906.
El mundo se va a terminar porque el mundo va a girar muy rápido y va a haber destrozos naturales.
That last example, I think, is from Uruguay, probably. And I don't know what that little girl is saying, but the reason I put that clip there is, if you notice the gesture that she made at the end, it's very common with little children doing souls. when they finish doing whatever they're doing and they describe it, and they look at the teacher's face and they go, okay? You know, it's the biggest reward a teacher can ever get. So basically, children in groups faced with a question, given the internet, can self-organize and proceed to answer questions that are years and years ahead of their time. I also discovered that admiration plays a very important part in all of this. It comes naturally, because if you ask them a hard question, these little boys and girls have given you a nice answer. But naturally you say, that's fantastic, that's wonderful. I couldn't have expected anything better. It helps the process. Because then they want to go deeper and say, this is nothing. I gave this process a name. I called it the method of the grandmother. Because if you think about it, parents and teachers use discipline as the main motivator for learning. You know, you must pay more attention to your studies, you must practice more, because otherwise when you grow up you won't get a job. You know, what am I spending all this money for? You know, you pay more attention, etc. Whereas the grandparents use a different method. The grandparent says, oh my God, how did you do that? When I was your age, I was very stupid. And the child says, can't you even understand this? Now let me show you something else. So the grandparent drives the learning spiral using admiration as her method, as opposed to discipline. I called it the method of the grandmother, and in an article in a newspaper in England, I put out an appeal. I said, if you are a grandparent, if you have access to the internet and a video camera, then can you give me 1 hour of your time every week for free? In 2 weeks, I got 200. I know more British grandmothers than anyone in this room. Okay? So they form what's called the granny cloud. Okay, the granny cloud sits on the internet, and if there are children who need that method, I can Skype them in. So now, I don't need the hole in the wall anymore, because I can Skype the granny into the slum. Okay? We started experimenting with this from England to India back in 2010. Here's an example.
You can't catch me. I'm the gingerbread man. Well done, very good.
So, by about 2012, the method of self-organized learning environments, SOLs, and the granny cloud were both developing. And in 2013, I won a prize. It was a big prize called the TED Prize. So what I decided to do was to use the money from the TED Prize to build on a concept called a school in the cloud. Now I must explain something. A school in the cloud is not an internet website. Okay, it sounds like that. It's not as though there's no physical school and there's only a website. No, no, no. A school in the cloud is a combination of two things: a self-organized learning environment and, if necessary, the granny cloud. What happens if you bring them together? So I decided to use the money that I had from the prize to build 7 experimental facilities. I actually ended up building 10. 5 would be in India, ranging from the very remote areas of India, no electricity, no internet, no schooling, no healthcare, that sort of area, into urban middle-class India, and then I would build 2 facilities in urban middle-class Britain. And over a period of 3 years, I would see where it goes. So we designed the measurements, we did the budgets, and I built the 7 schools. Then I got a little more money and I built 3 more. This is an example of one of them, a village called Chandrakona in Bengal in India, very remote farming community. Inside, nothing very great, as I described to you. Big screen computers, a large screen on the wall for Skype, and that's about it. The only one thing you might notice there, which is of interest, which may be of interest, there is no teacher. Harlem, New York. You know, Harlem's can be a pretty rough area. You know, and people say, well, children can be, very disorganized in Harlem. Will it really work? They're not really interested, and so on. Well, a PhD student of mine built a school in the cloud in Harlem, inside a regular government school. And her results, which are about to be published, are absolutely amazing at the rate at which the children progressed. The local superintendents of education came to have a look at the Harlem school and asked me a question from a long time ago. Who is teaching them? And I said, well, that's a long story. A village called Newton Aycliffe up in the northeast of England, County Durham. That's more or less where I live. If you draw a vertical line from London up to Scotland, Edinburgh, then about 2/3 of the way up is Newcastle, Durham, and that area of England. This is one of those schools. They built the whole facility with AstroTurf and one wall of glass with a lawn outside. So if you enter the room, it looks as though the lawn has come inside. And they have parked benches and computers and pretended gas lamps, and it's lovely, really. The children love these spaces because they know that not only are the spaces, they don't look like classrooms, but they are under the control of the children themselves. And of all the facilities that I've built so far, each one is spotlessly clean. When you give them the ownership and your trust. This is the last one I built. It's in a village in Bengal, again, called Dasghara. I used everything I learned in the last 3 years to put it all together. It's about 15 by 15. But it's the smallest structure that you can actually do outside. It's 15 square meters, and it can take up to just about 20 little children. It's in the shape of a glass hexagon. And you might ask me, why did you choose hexagon as the shape? I think you can guess the answer now. Bees. This is a school in Goa, India, called Paradise School. And the whole school is based on the concept of the soul. So each lesson, so what does that mean? It doesn't mean that every single moment you're doing a soul. What happens is that every topic is started with a big question, a soul. And then it may be taught. So if you are doing something like, let's say, you want to teach this is an experiment I did actually. We want to teach the history of the Roman Empire. I think I did this in Cyprus. So you take a group of young children and you show them on Google Earth, you zoom in on Italy. And then I zoomed in further on Rome. And as you zoom into Rome, you can see the Colosseum. So the children say, what's that? What's that? So I'd say, what? And they say, that big round building. And I zoom in even closer. And then I say, that's the question, you know. What is that big round building and why is it broken? Leave them for 30 minutes, you get the Roman Empire. Just out of nowhere. So what did we learn from the schools in the cloud so far? The children's ability to read and comprehend improves very rapidly. It's natural because, you know, they're reading off the internet. The internet doesn't know that they are children. So the internet throws everything it has at them. The children don't know what they are capable of reading and what they are not capable of reading. So they try to read everything. Result, rapid improvement in reading comprehension. 9-year-olds quoting from the Harvard Business Review, that sort of thing. Their ability to search on the internet improves very quickly. Again, very natural because that's what they're doing all the time. So they learn how to use keywords correctly. Have you ever considered that learning to search properly on the internet is a key life skill of this century? Now, I cannot understand why around the world it's not taught. You know, on the one hand, we teach children how to solve equations, but on the other hand, we leave them to understand the internet by themselves on the streets. That's not right, is it? We need to change that. So that's the end of the good news. We come to the bad news now. Examinations. You know, life today can be divided into 3 parts. Before examinations, you can use the computers, you can use your smartphones, you can use your smartwatches, you can do all of that. After the examination, you can use your computers, you can use your smartwatches, you can use your smartphones, everything. During the examination, you cannot use anything for some reason. During the examination, you must be alone. You must not talk to anybody. You must not look to the left. You must not look to the right. You must not use any device. You must use paper and pencil and your head to answer questions. The examination is like a time machine. It takes you back 200 years. Okay? As one of the students once put it, when I was describing it like this, I said, the exam, you know, it's like a time machine. Takes you back 200 years. And he said, into hell. So where did it come from? Well, I started looking for where did this come from? Why did we invent exams a couple of 100 years ago? And the answer is very clear. This is a, sorry, just go back. This is a picture from the 1920s. It's the picture of an office in the 1920s. No computers, no telephones, no assistive technology. So how do you do your data processing with people? You have big books, you write down things into those big books, you transfer from one book into another. What should you know? You should know how to read and understand. You should know how to write clearly by hand. And you should know how to do arithmetic in your head. These are the 3 abilities that a clerk needs. I'm sure you have a word for clerk in Spanish, the office worker from the last century. So we needed, the whole world was run by offices like these. We needed millions and millions of them. They had to be identical. They should dress the same way, talk the same way, and know those three things: reading, writing, and arithmetic. How do you do that? Well, the different empires on the planet that were running the earth at that time, they all invented a machine to produce exactly identical clerks with these three abilities in millions. A wonderfully constructed machine called school. Question is, what's that doing today? Why is it still there? Still producing identical people. Do we need it? Not only that, in order to cater to that ancient examination system, teachers have to follow the methods of the 19th century. Memorization, negative reinforcement, punishment, discipline. Naturally, because if the exam system is what determines your success or failure, then you have to prepare children for that exam. If that exam is from the 19th century, then you have to prepare the children the way they were prepared in the 19th century. That's the reality we are in right now. The problem is that a lot of governments around the world, when they get confused by the 21st century, want to push the dial back to 19th. Because that's all known. It's very simple. Give some money, build a school, get a teacher. Teacher teaches, children learn, sit for exams, end of job. Okay, what do we do? Well, this is the kind of world that your children are going to grow up in, right? It's very clear that this is the new office. Doesn't it look a bit like the hole in the wall, actually? Isn't it? So if we have to prepare our children for a world like that, shouldn't the examination system look like this? So all that I'm saying is that a simple way to drive change throughout the system is to do the following. Allow the use of the internet during exams. That's all. That's it. I mean, it's so simple. Bring your smartphone. So when I first said this in England, there was horror. Okay, one teacher said, but they'll answer everything. So I said, don't we want them to? Then there are people who say, but that's not knowing. So I say, well, if it gets you from point A to point B, do I care? So I think comprehension, communication, and computing should take over the roles or subsume the roles of reading, writing, and arithmetic. So reading goes into the generic area of comprehension, of being able to comprehend by looking, by reading, by hearing, by whatever. Communication should include writing, but only marginally. Because who is going to write by hand? I mean, I grew up writing by hand, but today if I have to write one A4 size page by hand, my fingers start paining. So, why bother with that? Instead, the generic area is communication. How do you communicate? By writing, by speaking, by video, by audio, photographs, whatever. And finally, how do you solve a problem? That's what I mean by computing, not computer programming. How do you solve a problem? What's an algorithm? I think one of the biggest ideas that children today need to know is what is an algorithm, a method. I think we can safely say that the purpose of schooling is to produce children who are happy, healthy, and productive, whatever productive might mean in your context. I don't think anybody would argue about it. So then, could I not use a decision-making matrix like this? See? So we put happy, healthy, productive on this side, comprehension, communication, computation on the other side. I get these 9 boxes. So anything that I want to decide about school, I can check whether it falls into that matrix somewhere in one or more places or not. Okay? So for example, let's say learning about literature. Does it make you happy? Yes, if you take the right kind of literature, it does make you happy. It's beautiful, poetry, music. Does it make you healthy? Well, in a psychological sense, I think there's enough data to show that literature will help psychological health. Does it make you productive? Yes, because it shows you different ways to communicate powerfully. So it falls, yes, into all 3. It should be there in every school. Now, let's take something else that I think, well, I had in my school. I don't know if you still learn. Do you learn multiplication tables? So you must have learned the 17 times tables. And I'm sure everybody remembers it. Okay, yes, I got the idea. So let's take 17 times tables and put it there. Does it make you happy? No. Does it make you healthy? No. But, does it make you productive? Yes, it did in 1920. So what am I working on right now? 3 things. One is I'm trying to look at what should curriculum be. How should one define what a curriculum is? And one of the ideas you might like to think about is that instead of making a curriculum from all the things that we know, that's how we make curriculum. Let's take all the things that we know, and here's this set, children should know that. Instead of doing it that way, how about if we made a curriculum from all the things that we still don't know? All the big questions. But I can tell you one thing, that human beings love a question to which no one knows the answer. It attracts us for some reason. We are built that way. So how about building a curriculum based on that, on the big unknowns of our time? What we know will naturally follow in our attempt to answer what we don't know. A pedagogy that involves the internet intimately. You must have seen it from all the work that I've done so far, that bringing the internet into the classroom is vitally important right now. We must find the right ways to do it, but to a child who takes out his smartphone during a lecture, you cannot say don't do that, because everybody does it all the time. What you need to be able to encourage is when to take it out and how to look at it. And finally, we need a new system of evaluation. And I'm stuck here. I don't know how. What should that new exam look like? What should we ask them? All I can tell you is one last little story from a 16-year-old in England. I showed him a GCSE question, something to do with political science or one of the social sciences. And he read the question, and he says, "Oh, so why do they want to know this?" I said, "I don't know. They want to know if you know it." And he said to me, "Give me my smartphone back." That's it. So somewhere in there, I think we'll get to the future of learning. There are a couple of websites you might find interesting. There's a website called The School in the Cloud, and there's a website, the next one, called the Granny Cloud. Between the two, you'll get a general idea of where all this is. And finally, if there is some sense in what I've seen in these last 20 years, if it is pointing towards a direction, then maybe that's where the future of learning is. Thank you very much.